Looking to invest? Start your journey by exploring exchange-traded funds with Global X ETFs. Exchange-traded funds, or ETFs for short, create baskets of stocks, bonds, and other assets that you can buy in a single trade. Global X specializes in ETFs that track emerging trends, like the rise of artificial intelligence, as well as strategies aimed to generate income potential. Visit globalxetfs.com to discover how you can get started.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome, folks. This is the More Money Show. This is WABC. Thank you so much for joining. We're on from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Saturday afternoon, and it is a beautiful Saturday afternoon across the eastern seaboard. Finally, after the horrible hurricanes and the negative effects on the weather it was so depressing for a good 10 days. We just had clouds and drizzle and rain pour. So it's nice to see an absolutely beautiful day. The blue sky is back. The sunshine is back. In the Washington, D.C. area where I live, it's in the mid-70s. Just a gorgeous, great to be alive day. Great to be in front of this microphone. It is the highlight of my week. It really is. I love doing talk radio. I love talking to you because I always say I have the smartest radio audience in the country. And by the way, it was a great privilege for me today to do the last hour of the Larry Kudlow Show. So 3 hours today. By the way, we are live. We are in color. We will take your phone calls. I want to have discussions with you. This is freedom of speech radio, and I especially like it if you have an opinion that disagrees with me. You know, if you can disagree without being disagreeable, we want to hear from you. I have some strong opinions. I'm a Trump guy, you know that, but I don't think that Trump walks on water. I mean, I don't always agree with Donald Trump on every issue. I agree with him on a lot of issues. And by the way, I have a new book out, folks. I'm going to do a short little advertisement for this, not because I want to make money. I don't know. I don't think that Art Flaffer or me are going to make much money on this book, but we put this book out because we want voters to be educated about what is at stake in this election. And look, this is a mighty important election. I think the country will be a very, very different place if Donald Trump wins or if Kamala Harris wins. We're going to be moving in exactly diametrically opposite directions depending on who wins this election. And, frankly, if you think the last 4 years has been good for America, if you think things are just honky-dory, as my mom used to say, then you probably should vote for Joe Biden. Joe Biden / Kamala Harris. But if you think that things have gone off the rails, and I do, every day that goes by, I'm like, oh my God. I was just talking with Liz Peek earlier on the show about the utter incompetence. These people couldn't run a 3-car parade. I mean, you've got these folks that are the way they have dealt with the crisis at the border. A junior high class could do better job than this. If you look at what's happened with the response to the hurricane, it is outrageous. The fact that they have been so incompetent in providing the most basic aid to people, millions of people along the eastern seaboard, especially in the southeast, that still have not received the recovery aid that they're supposed to. And now they're impeding private sector relief efforts because FEMA's in charge. They haven't done a very good job of it. And it is really outrageous that so many hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people still have not have their electricity restored. And incidentally, on that topic, if I may, something to think about, folks. We have these crazies who believe that we need to stop using fossil fuels. No, you know this. I've talked about this many times on this show. This is called net zero nonsense. And net zero means no oil, no gas, no coal. Most of them don't even want to use nuclear power, even though there are no emissions from nuclear power. And they want to put the entire economic system of the United States excuse me, including our transportation system, the trucks, the vans, the cars, the minivans, the SUVs, they're all millions and millions and millions of our transportation system. They even want to put the railroads on the electric grid system. Now, imagine that this were the year 2034, not year 2024, when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and the green groups want to shift the entire transportation fleet to electric vehicles. So in other words, they're plugged into the grid to get their power. And imagine you have a hurricane like this. Wow. Can you imagine what would happen if all of a sudden you plug in your EV or Volt and no power comes out? It would be a danger to the health and safety of the American people. And this is what they want to do. So this is one of those moments when you start to really reflect on how idiotic some of these policies are. And I'm sorry, they're idiotic. And they're not just dangerous to our economy. What I'm saying is they are dangerous to our life and safety. If you're in a dangerous area where floods are coming and you can't get your car, you can't drive out of the area because it's on the electric grid system and the grid has gone down. That lunacy, folks. This is like cuckoo for Cocoa Puff stuff. And they are moving aggressively ahead with this. If Kamala Harris wins, they will tell you what kind of car you can drive. They will tell you have to get rid of your gas car whether you want to or not. These are the same people. I did a debate this week in Dallas, and somebody from the Kamala Harris campaign was debating, and he was a nice guy, but he kept saying Trump's an authoritarian. He's authoritarian. I'm like, wait a minute, you're the people who want to tell people what kind of car they can drive, whether they can have electric stove in their gas stove in their house. You're the people who tell them whether they can have air conditioning, whether they can, they want to regulate every aspect of how we live our lives. And this gentleman was accusing Trump of being the authoritarian. I find that to be, almost comical that the people think that Trump is the one who is the danger to our liberties and our rights when you've got people who literally want to take your car away from you. And I don't think that's going to happen. You know why, folks? Because I think, by the way, I bet a lot of you listening to the show are in your car right now. Americans have a love affair with their car. And the idea, and we love to show off our cars. This has been the whole history for the last, since Henry Ford started rolling off those Model Ts. We love our cars. And the idea that Uncle Sam and these politicians are going to tell us what kind of car we can buy, that ain't going to happen. So get this book. The book, by the way, is called The Trump Economic Miracle. It was published by my friends at Post Hill Press. Donald J. Trump wrote the foreword to the book, and he was so nice to do this. And he was the one who came up with the title, by the way, the Trump Economic Miracle. We had Art Laffer and I had been working on this for many months, and we went to see President Trump and told him about the book. He said, "What's it going to be called?" And many of you know that he and I wrote a book earlier called Trumponomics, and that was a big seller back during Trump's first term. And we said, "Well, sir, we're going to call this Trumponomics 2.0." And Trump said, "No, I don't like that title." He said, "Call it the Trump Economic Miracle." And we looked at each other. We said, "Okay, that is a good title for a book." And so it is what we've done in this book. And I'm going to go through some of these numbers in the next half hour because I want you to be really well educated, especially if you're an undecided voter. But we look at every single statistic, every one that you can think of, and we look on the economy, that is, and we compare what happened when Trump was president, and we compare what happened when Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were running the show. And almost every one of these statistics shows that the economy did, in many cases, significantly better when Trump was president. And that goes for everything from credit card debt to small business conditions to the stock market. Yes, the stock market's been on a run, but you've got to remember the prices are up by about 22%. And so when you adjust these returns for inflation, the stock market did better when Trump was president. Obviously, inflation was much lower. The price of gasoline was lower. The price of eggs and groceries was lower. When you look at things like worker productivity, much, much better under Trump than Biden. By the way, this is all in the book. We've got the charts. We got the data. It's all the official government statistics here. One of my favorite ones here, let me just give you this one, that when Trump was president, when he left office, if you wanted to buy a new home, a median value home across America, your 30-year mortgage payment each month, because interest rates were so low, was $1,746. That was the $1,746 was your average mortgage on a median value home if you wanted to buy a house. Today, here we are, just less than 4 years later. The median mortgage payment on a median value home is closer to $3,000. So you're going to pay roughly 50 to 60 to 70% more. So this idea of coming, I've got this new home buyer tax credit or something. No. We don't need to spend more government money. We just have to bring the interest rates down, and we have to have better housing in this country. And that's not going to happen by Kamala passing out dollars. Don't you notice, by the way, their solution to everything is spend government money? They're spend. That's all they believe in. Spend money. If you want free childcare, you got it. You want a free mortgage, we'll help you pay your mortgage. If you can't pay your student loan, we're, as taxpayers, going to pay for that. All of these things, free. And this is going to bankrupt the country. Now, before I take this first break, I want to tell you one other statistic that I think is really important for you all to be paying attention to. The start of the new fiscal year was this week on October 1st. We are now officially in fiscal year 2025. As most of you know, the fiscal year starts on October 1 and ends September 30. So we've closed the book on the fiscal year for 2024. And now we know how much the government spent, how much the government brought in revenue, and we know how much it borrowed over the year. How much was the deficit, the federal deficit? Now, brace yourself, folks, because this is a sickeningly bad number. And by the way, I've been saying on this show for probably the last 4, 5, or 6 months that my prediction was that we would run a $2 trillion deficit. $2 trillion. That's 2,000,000,000,000,000,000,000. These are gargantuan numbers. So I had predicted we're going to run a $2 trillion deficit, one of the highest ever in the history of the country, except for the fact that when we had the pandemic and we had to shut down the entire economy. It turns out even I was wrong. Even I underestimated how high the debt would go up, the deficit. It went up to this year, this just completed year, we borrowed $2.3 trillion. So that's, if my math is right, that's roughly just a little short of $200 billion a month, folks, that we are borrowing. This is the Titanic, and this Titanic is headed to an iceberg. And look, both parties, shame on both parties. They just passed another multi-trillion-dollar budget without any opposition. They just spend, and Kamala wants to spend even more, and everything's going to be free. And if you think that's going to work out for the country, then you probably should vote for her. But this book, The Trump Economic Miracle, you go to trumpeconomicmiracle.com and you can get the book. And by the way, I think it's like $14. So it's not an expensive book. And please show this to your friends or your family members that are undecided and really can't make up. We still know there's about 15, 20% of voters who have not made up their mind on who to vote for. Give them this book and just say, look, you can read this in 2 or 3 nights. You could just spend even a few hours perusing it and looking at the pictures, and you can get the big picture, which is that Trump, when it comes to the economy, is the superior choice. Folks, we will be right back. This is the More Money Show. I am your guest, your host, Steve Moore. I guest hosted for Larry Kudlow this afternoon, which was a lot of fun. We'll be right back. This is WABC.
Talk Radio 77 WABC. It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC. You got me for 3 hours today, 3 hours. And by the way, we are live. We are in color. I am going to be taking your calls. By the way, we're going to start taking them right away because I'm excited to hear from you. There's so many issues I want to talk to you about today. And I learn a lot. I really do. I'm not patronizing you, folks. I learn a lot from listening to what you have to say. Your opinion matters at WABC. And if you disagree with me, I'd love to hear from you. If you can disagree without being disagreeable, we want to hear from you. Okay, here is the number. Are you ready? 1-800-848-9222. 1-800-848-9222. I'm told there are still 2 lines open. So I want to ask you about 2 questions. One is Trump versus Biden on the economy. Number one, or actually 3 issues. The second issue is, do you have any stories? Can you tell me about how you feel like this hurricane disaster has been dealt with? I think it's atrocious. I think it's an embarrassment what has happened in those states like Georgia and North Carolina with the devastation and the feeble response by Joe Biden. And the other thing I want to ask you all about is the strike that happened, the dock workers strike. And do you agree? I'm uneasy about this. I want our workers to be well paid, but a 60 to 70% pay raise? How many of you got a 60 to 70% pay raise? And I think Biden really put his palm right on the scale and forced the companies to make this deal. And I'm not so sure it's going to work out well for America, but I'd love your opinion on this. So I think, Mr. Producer, I think we have a couple of people already calling in on the More Money hotline. Who we got?
Well, we have Edward from New York, Steve.
Edward, thanks for calling in. What do you got for us this afternoon?
Hey, how are you, Steve Moore? Nice to speak to you.
Thank you.
I'm a little off topic. I wanted your opinion. Do you think that Mayor Adams not being the mayor of New York City will be a net positive or a net negative for the city?
Edward, thank you for calling. It is a good question. I do not live in New York. I actually live in the D.C. area. And I will say this, that New York City's in a lot of trouble. New York City is in financial trouble. You've got a lot of crime in the streets. When I go to New York City right now, I feel like the city is in decline. And I will also tell you this, Edward, because it sounds like you've been in New York for a long time. I believe that there was a renaissance in New York after America's mayor was elected, Rudy Giuliani. And what he did for the city, you could see. I used to travel because I used to work for the Wall Street Journal. I'd come a couple days a week. And so I'd come once a week for about 5 years. And every week I would come, excuse me, I could see the improvement. The graffiti went away. The crime went away. There was a kind of hop in the step of people on the streets. People were happy. They felt, it was a cleaner city. It was a safer city. It was a more financially sound city. And he did very basic things. He got the criminals off the street. He started to prosecute even for the small crimes, because if you don't prosecute small crimes, the big crimes start to happen. So I can't really comment on Mayor Adams. You all know better than me. But I just, as someone who lives, 200 miles away, and for someone who does travel to New York every couple of weeks, I see the city in decline, and I think new leadership is necessary. But look, I'm from Chicago, folks. We've got Brandon Johnson, who's the mayor there. He's a catastrophe. Look, every time progressives take over a city, whether it's San Francisco, whether it's Los Angeles, whether it's Oakland, whether it's Detroit, whether it's New York, whether it's Chicago, they contaminate and destroy everything that they touch. That's why progressives, you don't have to imagine what happens when progressives rule. You can look out your window and you can see it if you're in some of these major cities. So we need a Rudy Giuliani back in. And I don't know who the next Rudy Giuliani is. Maybe you all do, but that is my quick opinion. Mr. Producer, do we have any more callers?
Yes, we have Jack from Massachusetts.
Jack from Massachusetts, appreciate you calling in from New England. What do you got for us?
Hey, Steve, good to hear your voice. You're always a man of integrity and honesty and intelligence, but I wanted to...
Could you tell my wife that, please? Could you talk to my wife?
Steve, except for I only disagree with you on one word.
Okay, good.
I'm getting sick and tired of. You just used it 3 times. You know what that word is? Progressive. I'm so sick and tired of these radical socialist communists being called progressives, and everybody's doing it because Hillary Clinton said a few years ago, "I'm a proud progressive," and you yourself have fallen into that trap. They are socialists. They are communists. Please stop using that word to describe them.
Okay, hold on. You're making a good point, and I'm glad you called because I struggle with this because do I call them leftists? Do I call them liberals? I don't know if calling them socialists or communists is fair, but what do you think we should call these lefties?
If you remember, years ago, of course, George McGovern lost in a landslide. Unfortunately, my home state of Massachusetts was the only state to vote for George McGovern because he was so liberal. But liberal got a dirty word. And if you remember in the 80s and 90s, the word liberal was not being used by Democrats because it became a dirty word. So they used the word progressive to hide their socialist policies. I want people to use the word radical Democrat. What is so wrong about using radical Democrat?
Well, they are radical, and you are right about that. And, by the way, I don't like the term progressive either, because what progressive means comes from progress, right? And these people don't believe in progress. They want to take us back to the Stone Ages.
It's totally regressive, Steve, but you used it 3 or 4 times already during your show.
I know.
I don't understand it. Really.
I am guilty as charged, sir, and I appreciate your call. Maybe we should call them regressives, not progressives. Do we have time for one more quick caller before we take our break?
Yes, Linda from Long Island.
Linda, thanks for calling in. I love it when the ladies call in because, your opinion counts. And by the way, women are the one who are going to determine the outcome of this election. There's no doubt.
Okay. Linda, Steve, I'll speak to your wife for you. I'll help you out. Okay. Quickly, I don't think a lot of people understand what unrealized gains. What does that mean? They don't understand. This is, I would think this is one of the biggest things that Kamala came up with. They're going to, if anyone buys a house, young or old, if it just goes up a little bit, if anything happens and they get anything on it, they don't sell it, they don't get anything. There is no real gain. They're going to be taxing that. They don't realize that.
Yes. Linda, you are absolutely correct. Great call. We just have a couple minutes before our break, so I want to respond to what you're saying. I think you're spot on. And I think that what we're talking about is taxing people on their, if you have a farm or if you have a property or you have stock, and let's say you made money on your stock. Like I bought NVIDIA last year, one of the few good investments I've made, and we made about $40,000 on our investment, which is a nice little piece of cash. Well, they would want to tax me on that. Well, we still own the stock. We don't have $40,000 sitting around. What about the farmer who has a piece of farm property, maybe 100 acres, and let's say they bought it for $1 million. Now it's worth $4 million 30 years later, and they want to tax you 25% on $3 million. That's going to be, a huge, you're going to pay something like $750,000 in tax. Where the hell are you going to get the money? Where are you going to get the money to pay the tax? I think it is the most un-American tax. I think you're right. People don't understand what we mean by this, and I'm going to call it a property tax. It's a tax on the appreciation of the value of the property that you own. For the first time in America, under Kamala Harris, if she were to win, we will have a national property tax. How do you like paying your local property taxes? I don't. I mean, I pay through the wazoo on my property taxes locally. Now I'm going to have to pay a 25% property tax on top of that at the federal level. No, I think it's outrageous. I think it's un-American. No other country in the world does this. And this is because they're so greedy. They just want to get their hands on as much money as they possibly can. Folks, we're going to take a quick break. This is the More Money Show. Love your calls. We'll take them throughout the next hour and a half. That number one more time is 1-800-848-9222. And we will be back in 1 minute.
Talk Radio 77 WABC. It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
We are back, folks. This is the More Money Show. And now do we have our guests on? Dennis Nixon. Do we have Dennis on? We're still waiting for our guest. So while we wait, I want to give you a few more statistics. In this great new book, it's called The Trump Economic Miracle. The subtitle is The Plan to Unleash Prosperity Again, because that's exactly what happened when Trump was president. So let me just give you some statistics as a reminder of how the economy did when Trump was president. The average gas price when Trump was president was $2.47. That was the average price of gas. Under Biden and Kamala Harris, the average gas price was roughly $3.48. So almost $1 a gallon higher. So you have 15 gallons in your tank. Every time you filled up your tank in the years that Biden and Harris have been in charge, you've been paying essentially a $15 tax. I love this idea. Kamala Harris keeps saying, Trump is in favor of a national sales tax because he has some tariffs. Wait a minute. The national sales tax, this is a really important point. Prices are up by 20% since Biden and Harris came into office. That means every time you go to the store, you pay 20% more. That's the tax, right? Inflation is a tax. They have some nerve to say Trump wants to make you pay more at the cash register. No, it is Kamala Harris and Joe Biden who've done that, because every time you go to the grocery store, every time you go to the gas pump, every time you pay your credit card, you're paying a 20% extra tax because of the massive spending spree from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And this is all outlined in the book. You can go through this and you can see these statistics. Now, do we have our guest on yet? Okay.
Yeah, I'm here, Steve.
Dennis, it's so great to be with you, president of IBC Bank. I wanted Dennis to come on because he brought me to the border in Laredo, Texas, a couple of weeks ago. It was a fascinating trip. I had not been to the border in Texas. I'd been to the border in San Diego many, many, many years ago. But it was an amazing experience to see, Dennis, what's going on there at the border. And why don't you explain to people what's going on at the border? And by the way, you're a very pro-free trade guy. One of the things when we visited with you, Dennis, I came away really appreciating the importance of the U.S., Canada, Mexico free trade agreement. North America should be a free trade zone. It's good for all three of our countries, and we want to be united as North America against Europe and Asia and some of these other places. So give our listeners a sense of what is going on the border. What I saw was Laredo is booming. I've never seen so many trucks in my whole life. An amazing port of commerce. So what is your takeaway?
Well, thank you very much, Steve, for having me. And also thank you very much for coming to the border. I know we've talked about that for some time since we've been connected for a while, but you actually did it, which few people have done.
It's a great trip, a really great trip. Thank you for arranging it. Yeah.
I applaud you for doing that. Now we call Steve Moore the border expert. So we got you in the club. So
well, I think I've been to the border more often than Kamala has been.
That's actually to see things and spend time. You spent hours, and you were standing out there in that 105-degree temperatures watching these trucks come across the border, and so you understand the reality of border commerce and the struggle and the challenges that you face because you were there on the scene watching and participating, which none of these people do, and I salute you for that. And so I hope you'll become an advocate and continue. I know you're a free trader, and we're free traders. As I've talked to the president about reciprocal trade, and I get a little frustrated when he runs off on some of these little rabbit trails he goes on, but we'll deal with that later. But yes.
So hold on, Dennis, can I just interrupt you for 1 second? So you sent me a photograph. You just were with Trump a few days ago. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Yes, we
so
were.
How's he doing? How's his demeanor? Is he holding up? He's got an exhausting schedule. How was he?
Yeah. He was going since 6:30 in the morning. He started in Midland and then ended up in Houston for the afternoon evening event. I don't know how he does it. I'm older than he is, and I run out of gas pretty quick. But he's amazing fortitude. I just can't believe. Yeah, and he had a good round table, and we went in for a big speech, and he talked about all the deficiencies of government. Really, he was describing some of the terrible things that go on in government. Talking about how much money they wanted to spend on 2 new Air Force, Air Force One airplanes, and all the waste on and government purchase programs and stuff that we need to deal with. And also, obviously mentioned Elon Musk and the idea of trying to create some efficiency in government. So it was a very good meeting. We had a great turnout, a lot of energy and passion involved there. So it was, I consider, very successful. I was happy to be part of the host committee for that event, as well as we were a few weeks before with J.D. Vance when he came through Texas, and we introduced him into Laredo.
Did they come to Houston, or did they come to Laredo, or where did you see him?
Well, Vance came to Laredo and also to San Antonio, Houston, and then Trump came to Midland and in the morning and had an event there, and then came over to Houston for the afternoon, early evening event. So he had a full day, lots of travel.
Dennis, just so my listeners know, because as you know, we're here on the East Coast. We have New York and the D.C. metro area and people up as far as north as Maine. So many of them probably have not been to the border. So it's Laredo is right there on the border. There's There's those bridges over the Rio Grande that bring in both by rail and by trucks, massive amount of merchandise every day. And one of the things that we saw that disturbed me was, these trucks could be lined up, 2 miles long, waiting. You said sometimes they wait 3 to 4 hours to get across the border. It seems to me that's an amazingly inefficient system. But explain to our folks what you're seeing there at the border.
Well, first of all, I never want to start the discussion. Laredo is now the largest port in America. So people would think, hey, Los Angeles, maybe Chicago, maybe New York, maybe Houston. But Laredo's the largest port in America. We cross 20,000, more or less, 18-wheelers a day, which you firsthand saw.
20,000? Did you say 20,000?
20,000. You saw them. You said, I've never seen so many trucks all my life. And you can testify and validate that you saw probably incredible. That many yourself.
Yeah.
So we are number one port. We cross about $1 billion of trade a day. And we have continued to grow at low single digits and sometimes high double-digit numbers. And the problem we've had in that congestion you see is because we have not had the cooperation and the intensity that the federal government has to play to support the infrastructure that's needed to handle this commerce. And obviously, since NAFTA was put in place about 30 years ago, subsequently amended to into USMCA, that trade activities continue to grow in this North American economy. And this is where I think the public and our future administrations need to look at is that we have now a North American economy, Mexico, United States, and Canada, that has now been woven into our society over 30 years. And unfortunately, that genie has jumped out of the bottle and you can't put it back. And so those who want to stop that and kill that have to really step back and say, hey, wait a minute, we have so many issues. I sent you an article here the other day just describing one little complexity of a firm out of Minnesota. I don't know if you got the chance to read that, talking about the fact that these tariffs on Chinese goods, who were just slapped across the board without any specificity, resulted in him having to pay so much money for certain parts that he had to get to complete his assembly and manufacturing operations in the United States. So that cost pushed his price of his product, his end product, up to where he wasn't competitive anymore. So I say to the public, and I say to your listeners, this trade issue is the devil is in the details, and you must really pay attention to it. I've spent 40 years of my life working in international trade. Our company does about 40% of our business international. Our companies are worldwide companies now. We're global, and that genie has left the bottle, and so you can't put it back together. So those of us like yourself who are free traders, but I agree 100% with President Trump. We need reciprocity. We need fair trade deals, and we need deals that are going to help and support the American economy, and I think he's right on target there. And if we use tariffs to get to some of those agreements, well, that's fine. But tariffs as a practice, I don't agree with.
So I'm talking to Dennis Nixon, who is the president of one of the biggest banks in the Southeast, IBC, right there on the border. And I did have an amazing trip, Dennis, and you learn a lot from just seeing all this stuff firsthand. We've only got a couple minutes left. What do we need to do? What did you tell Donald Trump? How do we make sure you don't have an illegal immigration problem there in Laredo, right? It's not a port of entry for. It's mostly commerce that's coming in, right?
Yeah, most of the crossings are going upriver from us in the Eagle Pass area and downriver from us in the Rio Grande Valley. Yeah, one of the things that we talked about, Stephen, you were here, was our Bridge 4-5, which we're talking about. We needed to have that big new complex. It's on the southeast side of our city. Right. That there's 7,000 acres that's basically been set aside for this massive logistics crossing center that we want to build there. Thursday, we got the permit from the President of the United States to get that bridge going. That has been a 20-year project.
Wow.
20 years to get that permit. So now we're going to take the next step to build that bridge, which will open up a massive new level of efficiency and catapult commerce forward. So those efficiencies takes cost out of the market and keep our consumer prices down. So that's why this efficiency is so important to this process.
So one last question. Well, two quick questions before we have to take a break. Dennis Nixon is with us, the president of IBC Bank. Number one, I keep hearing from some of my friends in Texas that the Democrats think that they're going to turn Texas blue this year. What do you say to that?
I don't think so, but I do have concerns because our big cities, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, and Austin, are pretty much blue. We have seen a pattern over the last few election cycles, for instance, like we've lost all of our basically Republican judges in these blue cities. The Democrats have swept all the conservative judges out of office. We have elected district judges, state judges here in Texas, and that's a concern. And then these elections are getting closer, as obviously you saw when Beto ran against Cruz, that was a very close race. And we expect the race this time around for Cruz to be tight as well. He's running a good race, and Ted has become I think a very aggressive and strong senator for business. He's taken a little bit of his edge off that I think he had early on in his career, and he's become much more connected to our ideas and thinking, and he reaches out, and he's a much more dynamic leader now, and I think he's getting his stride. So it'd be horrible to have that happen, that he'd lose his election, but I don't think he will.
Yeah, I think he's going to win.
I think good ground to win, but it could be close.
It could be. Well, Dennis, I really so appreciate you bringing me out to the border. Folks, if you ever get a chance to do a border trip so you can see what Kamala Harris has not seen, what's really going on at our border, it is really quite an experience. And thank you so much, Dennis, for arranging that trip. Folks, this is the More Money Show on WABC. We'll be right back.
77 WABC. It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Okay, folks, we now come to the time where we hear from two of the best financial analysts in the country. I have them on every week on the show because I trust their judgment so much. And we will be back at the top of the hour after we get some words of wisdom on how you can invest and make more money. Are we doing the segment with our financial analysts? What's that? We have 7 more minutes, so I'm going to take more calls then. Let's do it. Who do we got coming up?
All right, Steve. All right, we have Rich from Pennsylvania.
Rich, thanks for calling in. By the way, before I take your call, I want to make sure that people know that our More Money hotline is 1-800-848-9222, and we have one line open. But, sir, please go ahead. I'd love to hear your opinion about things.
Thanks, Steve. There's no other logical explanation about the action and operation to address that hurricane is that the federal government and everybody in it is lying. When you think about the capabilities of our military, past and present, men in combat under heavy fire, building pontoon bridges, putting up roads and railroads, putting up hospitals, building tent cities, and they could have had 3 parts of this done and rescued already. We have such a fantastic.
I think we may have lost our caller, but he's making the case that FEMA. There are a lot of great people that are doing everything they can to save lives and to also make sure that people are cared for. But I still believe that we could be doing much more. I feel like if we had responsible, business-like people who know how to run things, we wouldn't see the catastrophe that's happened in the Southeast. But who is our next caller?
All right, we have Eduardo from Tampa.
Eduardo, thank you for calling all the way from Tampa, Florida. By the way, were you hit at all by the hurricane?
No, I made it, as I mentioned, because I hear you on Dan and Amy in Chicago. I made it because I'm in North Tampa. So no flooding, no power loss, so I made it. So it helps to be away from the water. Let's put it that way.
Okay. But, what do you got for us, Eduardo?
This is a disgrace with these FEMA running out of money and, of course, having this money instead for illegals. Black Americans don't count. White Americans don't count either. So it looks like if you're
wait, I'm not understanding. What do you mean? What do you mean we don't count?
Well, Americans don't count. The government has this thing, and it has to do with the fact that both parties want these people working, particularly like for the Chamber of Commerce. I think that's kind of in the lead as far as priorities, and they really don't care about the average folks.
Well, I certainly believe that despite the fact that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris continue to talk unendingly about how much they care about working class people, they have done great disservice to the middle class folks of America. And this is covered, by the way, in our book, The Trump Economic Miracle, where we show that the average family with a median income in the United States is actually poorer today than they were 3.5 years ago, 3.75 years ago. Whereas the average family gained $5,000 in income when Trump was president. That seems to me to be game, set, and match. If you're going to vote based on your wallet and your pocketbook issues and the kitchen table issues about whether you can afford to send your kids to a good school, whether you could take a vacation this year, whether you can pay your credit card bills, I don't think there's any question in that case. Now, look, I know some people are going to vote on abortion. Some people are going to vote on climate change. Some people are going to vote on childcare issues. But what I'm here to tell you tonight and today, folks, is if your main issue, which every poll shows for 2 out of 3 Americans, the main issue is those pocketbook issues, then Trump's record is substantially better. Do we have time for one more caller?
Yes, we have Denny from Pennsylvania.
This is so cool. I mean, we're getting people from Florida. We're getting people from Texas. We're getting people from all over Pennsylvania. That's what I love about this station. We have an incredible reach. Thanks for calling in.
Steve, I'm a conservative. I listen to you every week and Larry for years, and I agree with everything you say, except two minor things, two minor subjects.
Okay, what are they? I'm ready. Hold on. I want to write these down. Okay, what's the first one?
Well, a month ago that you said that Jimmy Carter caused inflation when you were rating presidents. And say what you will about him. I know he wasn't successful. I know he didn't fix the problem. He may have even made it worse. I'm not sure about that. But I know he didn't. He walked into that situation. So I just want to be clear on that. I'm not a fan of his or anything, but that's...
So hold on. I want to take these on each one because this is a good point. And I think you're making a very fair point, sir. So you're exactly right that you are exactly right that we had inflation long before Jimmy Carter came into office. It really began under LBJ when we spent all the money on Vietnam, and then we spent all the money on the Great Society programs, the big expansion of the welfare state, one of the greatest mistakes in our country's history. And, we spent money on guns and butter at the same time. We started to run up enormous budget deficits. It started with LBJ, and then it went to Nixon, and Nixon, let the spending out of control, and then Jerry Ford, and then it ramped up to Jimmy Carter. But what I'm here to tell you, though, is everything Jimmy Carter tried to do to fight inflation with, whip inflation now stickers and he wanted more taxes and all these things. In my opinion, they made inflation worse. It got up to 11%, the worst we've had in 50 years. But I think you make a fair point. Okay, we've only got a minute left. What's your second point?
Well, the win buttons were Ford. He started that.
Oh, you know what? You are right, sir. I stand corrected. Thank you very much. You're a good historian. So I stand corrected. You're right. The whip inflation now was under Jerry Ford. Great point. But what's your second point?
As far as democracy, I believe that we live in a democracy. We call it because it's essentially a democracy because that's where it comes from the Greek. Demos crisis, which means people power.
So we're at a hard break. I hear your point. I will address that later, but we got a hard break right now. We'll be right back. This is the More Money Show on WABC.
Hey, it's Ryan Payne and Bob Payne from Payne Capital Management. Of course, that's Payne. Coming to every week on the More Money Show, talking about the markets, the economy, your retirement. And Bob, man, oh man, it was another great week on the Street of Dreams, as you like to say.
It's a fantastic week, and we've been talking about this week after week. The Fed's not pulling off a soft landing, Rye, whatever that means. The economy has never needed to land. It's still flying. It's been flying for the last couple of years. That's why the stock market's doing so well.
But I feel so bad for those pessimists. Every week they keep telling us the economy's going to fall off a cliff. The labor market's going to fall off a cliff. And Friday, we had a huge jobs number. There's no denying it. The labor market is extremely strong, which means wages are going up and actually going up over inflation now, which they weren't for a long time, which was a big problem during the Biden administration. But now wages going up over inflation, which means people have more purchasing power, which means they have more money to spend. That's very good for the economy. I don't care what they tell you.
Well, that's the king. You got to start thinking that way. You can't care what they tell you because they're not going to tell you the truth. You have to invest your money based on your plan. That's why a planning-based investor always makes more money than somebody who's watching the tape and watching the TV every day trying to figure out what's going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. It's and they're only playing money more in quarterback, by the way. But what you have to think about right now is the Fed's going to continue to cut short-term interest rates. And we're seeing this right now, that 5% money market fund. It's like death by 1,000 cuts. It's going down every single day. So for all of us sitting with all this money in money market funds, short-term CDs, this is a real problem because when that money is going to be reinvested, it's going to be at a much lower rate. That's a problem for your retirement.
Right. It's headed to 3.6%. And you got time before that happens. So you can get your money invested in things that are yielding more right now. Because let's face it, when you're retired, you're not going to get that paycheck every other week. You're not going to have these other sources of income. You need to have income. Last I checked, you can't buy lunch in Manhattan with relative performance.
And the problem is, right, not only do we need income today, but you have to solve for inflation. I mean, inflation's still going up, maybe slower, but still going up. And whatever your cost of living is today, that's going to double over the next 20 years just to do the same thing. And if you look at it right now, I mean, you have plenty of places that you can put your money where you can get a lot of income. Income's increasing, but I can tell you where it's not. It's not in the money market fund where income's going down. So you have to be more proactive than ever because we kind of know what direction things are going, and cash is not going to be the place to be.
Yeah, it's kind of the dirty little secret, right? Inflation is that insidious hidden tax that we get hit with every year, regardless of what's happening in the headlines. Now, let's face it, the last 2 or 3 years, we've had this huge increase in prices because of inflation. Well, now that these pundits are telling us inflation's moderating, that doesn't mean prices are going back to where they were. They're already higher, 20%. So they're going even higher. And you know what? You can sit there and worry about it, or you can make sure you take action with your portfolio to get the money to grow over inflation.
Yeah, and I think you feel like you're between a rock and a hard place right now. I get it. It's kind of like, okay, my money market yield's going down, or those CDs are going to come due and I have to reinvest them. But the market's at an all-time record high. And I know I'm going to be that person. As soon as I invest my money in the market, that's the beginning of the day that the market goes down, and I'm going to ruin it for everybody. But that's not really the case here, right? I mean, if you look at longer-term yields are going up, you can lock into some longer-term yields. And there's lots of places to put your money right now that aren't at record highs where you're getting a lot of dividends and cash flow. And that's what you need for retirement. That's why you have to be so proactive right now.
You know, that's the thing. We've had this Magnificent Seven everybody hears about. There's people naming their dogs after NVIDIA. You know, it's kind of crazy right now. But, you know, blue chip stocks are still cheaper than they've been. You have other areas of the market you can invest in where there's good dividend yield, there's good growth. And, you know, I'll tell you what, Rye, you know, we're talking about a new technology, right? Talking about artificial intelligence, robotics, talking about quantum computing. Well, every company is a tech company. Every company's going to benefit from that. And you can benefit from that if you own those stocks.
Well, and that's the problem, right? If you buy NVIDIA or you're just buying the S&P 500, guess what? You're not getting much income. And that's the problem. If you're trying to solve for income, which you should be, because you need current consistent income when you're starting to live off your portfolio, you have to start looking in other places. And I think that's the biggest mistake a lot of us are making right now, because if you are going to invest, you know, you have to make sure that there's income coming off that portfolio, and it's income that's going up and it's consistent. And again, buying the S&P 500 and sitting in cash don't solve those problems. It's a mistake.
You know, and you got a lot of people sitting on their hands waiting for the election to be resolved. Well, it's going to be resolved, and it always resolves with the market going higher. But I'll tell you one thing that's happening. Nobody's talking about this deficit. Nobody's talking about this $35 trillion in debt that we have right now. And you know what they're really not talking about, right? Who's going to pay for it? Well, I know who's going to pay for it. We are, right? All of us are going to pay for it. That's why we got to make sure our income is protected from taxes. So municipal bonds, I think, are a really good place to put your money right now, right?
Yeah, you're getting somewhere between 3 and 4% tax-free. If you're in a high tax bracket here in the greater New York City area, man, that's like getting 6% right now. And to your point, Bob, right, no matter who gets in office, we're looking at probably higher spending because politicians, they just can't help themselves. And deficit spending means more inflation. And I think that's what you have to really focus on right now is inflation. Even though it's moderating in the short term, the bond market's telling you it's probably going to be higher in the long term. You have to have a portfolio that's built to grow against inflation. And again, I would say from all the portfolios we look at, most of us aren't positioned right to take advantage of the fact that, or really defend yourself against the fact that inflation is probably going to be higher.
And, you know, none of us, Rye, plan to fail, but sometimes we fail to plan. And what I see is that every investor who invests their money based on their own personal financial plan succeeds. They actually outperform all the other folks who I see telling me about the big trade they made in this stock or that stock. You know, that's not trading. That's not investing. That's gambling. You need to invest based on your goals, what you need, not what your neighbor needs or not what your brother's doing. You got to get invested based on what you need to accomplish.
Yeah, and it really does come down to what is that gap between what you were making when you're working and what you need now above and beyond Social Security, and that's what you have to solve for. And again, this is a problem. Think about this. If the Fed continues to cut interest rates, which is pretty high odds they're going to do that, your money market fund and CDs are probably going to be down to like 3.5% in a year, and you still have to pay federal taxes on that money. And if you have inflation on top of that, you're actually losing money against purchasing power it's a big problem. You really can't put your head in the sand right now because it's coming. We're at the cutting phase. And those who don't do anything and wait are going to miss a huge opportunity to solidify their retirement.
Well, Ryan, there's opportunity in the markets every day. And I'll tell you what, we had great news on Friday. Stock market went skyrocketing up all-time record highs in some indices, but actually bond yields went up. So and they're the yields that you need to invest in for income when you're retired or while you're retired right now. You can't be sitting in a money market fund hoping that rate's going to go back up. You can grab some really good rates. You got a better deal today than you had just 3 weeks ago.
And if you think to yourself right now, okay, I get it, Bob and Ryan, your optimism is much better than the pessimism out there, and it's been right. I need to get a plan for retirement. I need to figure out what income I need. Well, here's your shot to do it. We keep 10 slots open for the entire show. If you saved over $1 million for your retirement, Bob and I will run for your total financial master plan, and we'll do that with no obligation or cost. It's a full holistic review. We literally look at everything. There's not a firm out there that will do this work up front. We're going to build you your own personalized financial portal. We're going to give you a bird's eye view of your entire financial life, and we'll hone in on every financial issue you need to address today, whether it's that income plan for retirement, how to take Social Security, how to draw from your portfolio, create income, beat out inflation without running out of money. We're going to build you that dynamic income plan. We're going to look at diversification. Markets have been extremely volatile the last couple of years. Has your portfolio been all over the place, up and down like a yo-yo? Or have you been sitting in cash? Paralysis by analysis, can't figure out what to do. We'll put together a full investment game plan. We'll tie it to your goals. We'll show you how to grow your wealth, but most importantly, protect it over the rest of your life. And we'll look at fees and taxes. Wall Street loves to sell you high cost, tax inefficient products, whether it's an annuity, mutual fund, brokerage product, structured product. We'll do a deep dive of every investment you own. We'll show you how to reduce the cost and optimize your portfolio for taxes. It's not what you make, it's what you take. You'll get our full tax playbook. We have 10 slots left. If you saved over $1 million for your retirement, you call or text right now.
Hey, don't miss out. All you have to do is text or call 844-752-6692. That's 844-752-6692. Or just simply call 844-PLAN-NYC. That's 844-PLAN-NYC. If you're one of our next 10 callers, you've saved over $1 million for your retirement. Our team of financial advisors and certified financial planners will help you to create your own unique total financial master plan. Now, there's no obligation. There's no other firm in the city that'll do this work for you, but you won't have it done either if you don't text or call right now at 844-752-6692. That's 844-752-6692, or just simply give us a call at 844-PLAN-NYC. That's 844-PLAN-NYC.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show. This is our second hour. Actually, I've been on for 3 hours today because I did the last hour of Larry Kudlow's show. Larry was a little bit under the weather and tried to fill those big shoes. That was a tough task, but having a lot of fun today with you folks, and I hope you're learning a lot. We call this More Money because we want you to make more money, and you've got to understand what's happening in politics, the economy, with the budget, with the employment situation. All these things are so critically important to our lifestyles and being able to pay our bills, what I call the kitchen tables issues. One quick point before I get to our next guest. I was just listening to the newscast, and two stories struck me. One is that the former governor is assaulted in New York City. And we had a previous caller who was talking about, do you think Adams, the mayor, has to go? And I don't live in New York. So you all who do live in New York have a much better opinion of this than I do. But when you have even, former politicians, even the former governor who can't walk down the street and be safe, I think we got a big problem on our hand. The second thing I wanted to mention, this is a little historical note for those of you who are old enough to remember. I'm 64, so I remember the late 70s when you had this. The New York Yankees had an incredible rivalry with the Kansas City Royals back then in the late 70s. This was when, the Yankees had Thurman Munson and, great teams back then. But the Kansas City Royals were really good too. And they had George Brett, one of the greatest hitters of all time. Probably I'd say one of the 10 greatest hitters of all time. And I don't know if somebody sent me a clip of this wild game that the Yankees had against Kansas City in the playoffs. And at one point, the Kansas City runner took out the second baseman. I think that was Randolph, and a big brawl ensued. And then a few plays later, George Brett, who the great Kansas City star, he ran into the third baseman. I think that was Craig Nettles, but some of you who follow this stuff may remember. And another big brawl ensued. But it just brought back memories of those were great series. I think the Yankees kept beating Kansas City. Those were 3 out of 5 series. I think the Yankees beat them like 3 times in a row. 2 great teams, and it got a little violent there at one point. Okay, but let's get back to our subject of the day, which is the economy. And I wanted to have a guest come in to talk about what happened with the jobs report yesterday, but also just the overall state of the economy. And there's nobody better than E.J. Antony, who works as an economist at the Heritage Foundation. He also works with me as a visiting fellow at the Unleash Prosperity. E.J., thanks for joining this afternoon.
No, Steve, thank you for having me.
So a lot to talk about, EJ, and we don't have a whole lot of time because I do want to get to our callers. But I thought of you because you've been analyzing a lot of this employment data, and everybody's telling me how great it is. And there's no question it was a good, solid report, thank God. But one of the things that you sent me that caught my eye, and forgive me if I'm not interpreting this data correctly, but as I look at your charts and your analysis, it appears to me that over the last 12 months or so, that the government sector of our economy, the public sector, the federal government, our states and our localities have added something like 500,000 additional workers. Is that correct?
Right. We're basically looking at half of all of the job growth that we've seen over the last year come from taxpayer dollars. And a lot of that obviously is just direct hiring by government, but you also have what you might call indirect hiring by government.
Yes,
that's where, as you know, Steve, if the government, let's say, gives a grant to a private school or a private hospital, which hires a teacher or a nurse, then that's still funded by taxpayer dollars.
Well, another good example of that, EJ, would be all this green energy. And we're spending, I think Kamala Harris was boasting that she and Joe Biden have spent $1 trillion on green energy. Well, those aren't, so you have these people making solar panels. Those aren't real jobs because it's all just funded by taxpayer money. And that must be a huge part of the employment as well.
Oh, absolutely, and that is a big reason why so many of the manufacturing jobs that we've seen over the last couple of years are not representative of real growth in the economy. You have people making products that are literally selling at a loss, but for all of the government subsidies.
Right. What is it that some of these car companies have lost like $40,000 per electric vehicle or something like that? I mean, the numbers are astounding.
Exactly, Steve. You're 100% right. And the crazy thing is, when Ford publishes numbers like that, saying we're losing tens of thousands of dollars per vehicle, we should keep in mind that that's after they've already received tens of thousands of dollars in subsidies.
How do you lose money when they're paying you all this money to make it, and they're paying all these, they're paying the people to buy them, and they still won't buy the electric vehicles. I mean, it's a joke. But I want to get back to the direct government jobs, if I may, because you're right. Also, healthcare, at least half the healthcare jobs are tied specifically to government because government taxpayers are paying for half the healthcare system, right?
Right, exactly. And the other thing that we should draw attention to is the difference between payrolls and people employed. So, as you know, Steve, these reports are made up of 2 different surveys. There's a survey of households that asks people, are you employed or not? That's where we get the unemployment rate. And then there's a survey of businesses as well as the government where we ask how many people are on your payroll? How many payrolls do you have? And what's really scary is that in this last report, if we look at the household survey, the number of people saying they work for the government, all layers of government, federal, state, local, exploded by 785,000 in a single month. So that's what really drove the unemployment rate down to 4.1%. If government doesn't hire all of those people last month, the month of September, the unemployment rate would go up. It would have gone up to about 4.5%.
Well, it's by the way, you can't have a government job without somebody in the private sector subsidizing that job, right? So you can't build an economy on the back of government unless you're an entirely socialistic economy. And I'm troubled by this because for another reason, EJ, and that is that I was just looking at the numbers, and I told our listeners this earlier, but I think it bears repeating that the fiscal year ended on October 1st. So we're now in fiscal year 2025 right now. But the 2024 numbers, they're not exact. They haven't done the exact count, but the latest estimate is that we borrowed $2.3 trillion in 2024. And forgive me, but I thought that was supposed to be an expansion year, a recovery year. We weren't in a recession. How and why in the world are we borrowing $2.3 trillion in an economy that's supposed to be in a recovery?
Probably for the same reason that Harris is bragging about spending $1 trillion on so-called green energy. I mean, we're wasting all this money at a breakneck pace. And Steve, I remember, I'm sure you do too, back when the Treasury was estimating that for last fiscal year the deficit was only going to be about $1.7 trillion. And oops, we were off by $600 billion. I mean,
amazing.
This is maddening. But it's what happens when the government wastes so much money.
Yeah. So on the job front, what's going on with the what I call the makers of the economy? People in construction, people in business services, people in manufacturing. Those numbers don't look so good now, do they?
No, especially once we start adding in the benchmark revision. So this is an annual process that the Bureau of Labor Statistics does, where they take much more comprehensive data and they adjust the monthly jobs numbers in order to try to get things as accurate as possible. They don't do that to begin with because the data is just not available right away. So take manufacturing, for example, Steve. Since the beginning of 2023, we've actually been losing manufacturing jobs, but not that much. Once you factor in that annual benchmark, though, which will be finally added in once we get the January data for 2025, that's when we incorporate those numbers. Manufacturing, as of right now, is off by almost 140,000 jobs. So the sector is not doing very well. The problem is we just haven't added in all of those losses yet to the official totals.
So we just have about a minute and a half left, EJ, and great information you're providing my listeners. So thank you very much. This is EJ Antony, who's one of the chief economists at the Heritage Foundation and also works with me at Unleash Prosperity. By the way, if you're not getting the Unleash Prosperity hotline, shame on you. You should get it because it's free. All you have to do is go to unleashprosperity.com, sign up, and you'll get it every morning. And it's a great source of information on the economy and politics. But EJ, I am concerned about what's happening with worker paychecks. And I saw our Treasury Secretary the other day saying that, Janet Yellen saying, workers are now, they're ahead of the game. But when I look at the data, if you look at like those, and you've been one of the experts on this, looking at the weekly earnings of American middle-class workers, it's still down a bit, isn't it, under Biden?
It is. It's down several percent. And, that may not sound like much, but for the typical American family, you're talking about thousands of dollars per year in lost purchasing power.
Would it be, so when you say, what's your best estimate? I've been using the number 2,000. Is that about right? Or what is your estimate?
I think it's closer to 3,000. Now we'll have a better sense of that next week. Once we get the inflation data for the month of September.
So hold on, DJ, because I want to make sure people understand what we're talking about. The numbers that EJ and Antony are telling you are the important ones. That for the average family in America today, they're between $2,000 and $3,000 poorer than they were when Biden came in office. Is that a fair thing to say?
Absolutely, Steve. And that's despite the fact that the average American family's weekly paycheck is larger today than it ever has been before. The problem is prices have just gone up so fast.
Yeah.
Exactly. And
Okay.
Janet Yellen loves to talk about how, we've made progress over the last year. Well, that's true, but what about the 2.5 years before that where we fell behind?
We dug ourselves in a pretty deep hole. And by the way, that the numbers for under the Trump were not negative 2,000. They were about positive 5,000. So that's an amazing contrast. EJ, Antony, thanks for joining at the last minute and giving us your up-to-date information about what's happening with the economy. Folks, we'll be right back. This is the More Money Show on WABC.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
We're back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WABC. We've been on for 2.5 hours now because I did the last hour of the Larry Kudlow Show. I hope everybody's having a wonderful weekend. It's a gorgeous day all over the East Coast. So get out after the show is over and get some sunshine and get some fresh air and get some exercise. It's the best way to stay healthy. I wanted to bring on my friend David Bahnsen. We've had a great show, by the way, so far. I always say I'm not the best radio talk show host, but I get some of the best guests to come on. And David Bahnsen is a financial genius. He has been a longtime friend. He's an author of incredible books, including my favorite one is called a book called There's No Free Lunch, which I put right next to my bed because it's one of those books that you can just flip through and learn economic lessons. And I like to read it for 15 or 20 minutes before I go to sleep, not because it puts me to sleep, but because I learn a lot from that book. That one's called There's No Free Lunch. And he has a book that just came out recently. I think, David, this is your last book, but you're so prolific, I can't always keep up with you. Full-Time Work and the Meaning of Life, which I love that too, because I believe, as David does, that there is dignity and meaning and fulfillment in work. And so, David, thanks for joining this afternoon.
Well, wonderful to be with you. And yes, full-time is my last book. Unfortunately, I'm too busy working full-time to write another book.
Well, you seem to churn them out so quickly. And look, you're one of the smartest financial analysts I know. You've been incredibly successful. You're also someone who has a keen ear and eye on what's going on with politics. So let's talk about your how you view the economy and the stock market right now, David. I'm a little worried about, I see inflation coming up again. I was looking at the commodity index, and since the Fed did their jumbo rate cut, commodity prices have zoomed up by 11% in just a few weeks. That's a gigantic increase. But I wanted your take on the health of the economy and the markets.
Yeah, so let's first talk about that point because it's an important point about commodity prices. Something else happened at the same exact time that the Fed cut rates, and it is giving a mixed signal. It's very legitimate to look at commodity prices and wonder what's going on in inflation. But what is a larger factor in commodity prices jumping the last 2 weeks? The Fed moving 50 bips, which really is geared towards trying to unfreeze our housing market and avoid a lot of these corporate debt resets that are about to reset at higher rates, or China throwing the kitchen sink at lowering reserve requirements, lowering their policy rate, trying to increase construction activity, they have 90 million units of unsold housing. Iron ore and copper are really levered to China. And I think that commodity prices moved in the last 2 weeks far more around global, macro China conditions than they did anything the Fed is doing.
Mm-hmm. So what does that mean? I mean, what does that mean for investors then?
Well, I mean, as far as the outlook for investors, the biggest problem investors face is not necessarily will they or won't they with the Fed, will there or won't there be a recession, will there or won't there be a Republican president. All of those things matter. All those things are kind of looming and uncertainties. But the biggest issue is, let's say you got a good result, whatever a good result means, around the economy, around monetary policy, and around the election. You still just have an S&P 500 that's trading at 21 times next year's earnings. And I think that that's the biggest risk investors have, is that by buying the whole market right now, you're just thinking that a very expensive artificial intelligence story gets even more expensive. So we have a really hard time with that story. We don't think it's a great thesis for investors to purchase. We're much more selective, more value-oriented, Steve, and more dividend-oriented.
So time to be cautious. I mean, this is a market that's been on quite a tear for the last 18 months or so. So it sounds like you're cautious.
Yes, and the thing I would say is that the market has partially been on a tear because earnings have grown a ton. And so I look at free cash flow yields and I look at earnings because I look at data that can't really lie, that can't really be obfuscated. When companies are making more money, markets are supposed to go higher. Well, companies have made more money. That's a good thing. We should all be happy. Margins have gone up, profits have gone up. But when the stock prices go up far more than that, well, we've seen this happen a few times in the last 20, 30 years. And generally, it requires there to be kind of a correction or a bear market to reset things. And, you know, NVIDIA is making a ton of money, but it's trading at 70 times earnings. And Microsoft's making a lot of money, but it's trading at 50 times earnings. And so I don't think very many people want to wait 50 years to get their money back.
So you bring up NVIDIA, and my wife does our investing because she's smarter on this stuff than I am. And she bought a ton of NVIDIA stock about a year and a half ago. And we're like up, 4 or 5X or something like that on that. It's one of the few great investments we've made. So do we sell it? What do we do now? Do we sell it?
Well, look, I don't think people like paying capital gain tax. I don't know if it's in a retirement account or not, but, you know, I would certainly be trimming the gains back and being very grateful for your wife's good stock picks. But yeah, I think it's bubbled up. And I think back, Steve, that you remember it well, those companies in the late 1990s.
I do.
You know, it's one thing to make fun of the pets.com stories that never made money and then they went away a year or two later. But I'm talking about really, really profitable companies like Cisco and Juniper and Intel. They still are not back to their highs from then. And it's not because they didn't make money. You know, Microsoft didn't get back to where it was in 1999 until 2016. And that's one of the most profitable companies in human history. It was in a bubble. And I think NVIDIA is in a bubble.
Oh, you do? Okay. What about any other companies you think that are in a bubble?
I think the whole AI type story.
Wow.
You know, that there's just a lot of companies that have not figured out how they're going to make any money on it. And then companies like NVIDIA that are making a fortune on it. The problem is they're making money as a bunch of other companies are buying the stuff. But then those other companies haven't figured out. And if you start seeing the order flow for Microsoft and Google drop, it's inevitable. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of when.
So we only have a few minutes left. I'm talking to David Bahnsen, who is an extraordinary financial analyst and author of many great books, including There's No Such Thing as a Free Lunch. And so, David, your book on full-time on employment and the fact that we don't have enough people working is so important because it's not just, and we've had this conversation before, but I want you to say it again because the message is so important. That work is important, not just because it earns a paycheck and helps pay the bills, but it's important for the people's sense of self-worth and human achievement and fulfillment to be able to work. And I'm very concerned. I see a decline in the number of people who are working versus, say, 20 or 30 or 40 years ago.
Yes, and I think it's worse than I'm able to really articulate because, first of all, the primary drop in our labor participation force is 25 to 35-year-old men. Okay, 25 to 35. That's when you're supposed to be in the prime working age years of your life.
Yes.
We have
Yes.
3.3 million men, 3.3 million. Look, there's 1.1 million women trend line that are less, but in that age bracket, oftentimes when women are having kids, there's a dynamic at stage of life where they will leave the workforce for a time. We know.
Hold on.
A lot of babies.
Why do you think? Because I don't want to mean to cut you off, but I want to get to the main point here, which is really important.
Yeah,
I agree with you that I have three sons that are in that age range, and they're doing pretty well, but they have a lot of friends who are not working. And why do you think that is? I mean, what's happening to these young males?
Well, I believe it's very cultural, and I've become very fond since the COVID moment of the line. You learn how to be unemployed. Okay, you lose your touch, you lose your discipline, and then you get accustomed to how to game the system. The food stamps here, and the unemployment benefits there, and living on mom and dad's couch there, and I think that's the problem, is that sociologically it's become acceptable. And I think that, Steve, I'm a man of faith. I think that there's a loss of spirituality. There's a loss of purpose. There's a loss of morality.
I think
this legalization of marijuana has been a terrible thing in terms of what it's done in our workforce. All of these factors play in. And
by the way, I think even I, I'm 64, and I lived through, as we all did, COVID, and it changed the way we work. And even my own productivity is not what it was before COVID. I find myself, I don't go into the office as much. I'm not as productive. I feel I slough off more. I think I agree that we've kind of lost the value of work. And work is so important. By the way, you've shown in your book that people who work are happier than people who don't work.
Yeah, there's no question. And what I tried to do in the book is show why that is. And I really believe it's intrinsic to the human soul, that there is something about the purpose of usefulness. It's not about money. Because if somebody wins the lottery, they're going to be happy that they can pay their bills. But when you can have your needs met by meeting the needs of others, you feel useful, you feel productive, and it feeds self-esteem. And I just think that there's a virtuous cycle from work that is both economically and spiritually productive. And the opposite is true when people aren't working. It's why the labor data every month drives me crazy, because we're focused on who has jobs, who's looking for one, but we need to be focused on who isn't even looking for one.
I couldn't agree more. And the government is undermining human happiness and achievement and the prosperity of our country by paying people not to work. I mean, we don't want people to go hungry or homeless or, suffer from deprivation. But every one of these programs, in my opinion, every one of them should have a work requirement for able-bodied people. Don't you agree?
100%. And the work requirement for welfare passed in the Gingrich-Clinton reform of 1995 was one of the best things that happened. And it made people happier. The happiness index went up, not down.
That's amazing. David Bahnsen, thanks for joining us. Really good stuff, folks. This is the More Money Show. We'll be back with Steve Forbes in just 1 minute.
It's More Money with leading economist Steve Moore.
Stephen Moore is with us, economist.
With more than 30 years experience as an economist and as a leading thinker of government on business, showing deep understanding of the shifts in the global economy. He's leading economist Steve Moore with More Money on Talk Radio 77 WABC. Now, here's your host, Steve Moore.
Welcome back, folks. This is the More Money Show on WBC Talk Radio. I always try to save the best for last. And so my final guest of the afternoon is the great Steve Forbes, who should have been president twice. He should have, if the American people had been smart, we would have elected Steve Forbes to the presidency, because he is so full of incredible ideas, everything from the flat tax to term limits to medical savings accounts to a lot of things that were controversial when Steve Forbes first started talking about them are kind of conventional wisdom now, although we haven't passed all of these things. He and I still work daily on trying to get a flat tax passed. But Steve Forbes, thanks for joining.
Good to be with you, Steve. Thank you for having me on.
So let's start with the flat tax, because I wanted to have this discussion with you, and that's why I've been wanted to get you on the last few weeks. I just wrote a piece talking about how what Kamala Harris and the Democrats want to do is the absolute opposite of good tax policy. So what you taught me, and others like Dick Armey back 25, 30 years ago, you've been the Pied Piper on this issue, is you want low tax rates, right, Steve? And you want a broad base so that everybody pays their quote fair share, but you want the rates as low as possible so they don't distort the economy. And you bring those rates down, and you get more incentives to work and save and invest. And you taught me that, and you could expand on that if you'd like. But my point is, what Kamala Harris wants to do, because I've looked through her plan, Steve, is she wants to raise the rates way back up, like what they were before Reagan was president, and then have all these special interest loopholes. That's terrible tax policy.
Yeah, it's also a statism, the kind of thing we saw back in the 1930s. So we won't use incendiary words what this is all about, but it is statism of the worst order. Yeah. Yeah. And the key thing about the flat tax is, as you indicated, it removes barriers to people who want to work, people who want to start businesses, and enables people to get pay raises, as Lincoln put it, improve their lot in life. The plan that I last had, a family of 4 would pay no federal income tax on the first $53,000 of income, and then no tax on savings, no death tax. You should be allowed to leave the world unmolested by the IRS.
Yeah, all the 70,000 of them, right?
And the tax rate above 53,000 would be only 17 cents on the dollar. So the corporate rate would be lowered as well, and to 17 from the current 21. And she wants to raise it to 28. And as you know, when you add states in the equation,
right.
By golly, what that does is raise it to 33. The second worst in the world, far higher, as you love to point out, than China, for crying out loud.
Amazing. And Russia, and Russia too.
And it's just beyond words. So what they want to do, it's all about trying to get more control over our lives. Whether it's making sure we can't have working washing machines or gas stoves, or
no air conditioning.
Light bulbs. They're after light bulbs now too. So whether it's earning a living, creating resources, being able to develop your talents, having the opportunity to move up the ladder of success, they will make it extremely difficult. And this will have worldwide repercussions if the U.S. economy, which is sort of limping along now, goes into a terrible recession, which it would if these tax proposals were enacted. You would see us in a severe recession, depression, and that would be bad for the world. We should have run that from back in the 1930s. And how her tax plan, along with what she endorsed from Joe Biden, how that has not been put to the test in the public marketplace from the media is just astonishing and irresponsible.
So, I'm talking to Steve Forbes, the Forbes Media, and he obviously is former 2-time presidential candidate and took the world by storm. And I always say this, and I this is not false flattery, Steve. I think even though you did not win your races, you had a tremendous impact in terms of how people think about issues. And it was really an incredible thing to behold when you ran for president those 2 terms.
Now, fortunately, since those campaigns, at least 25 other countries have adopted the flat.
Yeah, you were running for president in the wrong country. But I wanted to I'm going to put my Elizabeth Warren hat on, okay, Steve? So I'm Elizabeth Warren, and I'm debating you. I'm not really Elizabeth Warren, folks. And here's how I'm going to respond to what you just said.
It can be anything you want.
Here's my response, and I want you to respond to this. Okay, I'm Elizabeth Warren. Steve Forbes wants to cut taxes for the rich. He just cares about rich people.
The answer to that is the way we design the flat tax is that everyone gets a tax cut. And the other thing is when your incomes go up, guess what? That means a better life. So we'll have more rich people. We'll have more people going from lower incomes to higher incomes. And that's what the essence of the American dream is all about, progressing, the right word for progressive, moving ahead.
So now I'm going to, part two of Elizabeth Warren's response to you is, Steve Forbes wants to blow a hole in the deficit.
Oh, yes, kettle pot black or some whatever that phrase is. It's hilarious. Here we have an economy that's growing. Thankfully, we don't have a major war involving the U.S. yet, but who knows what happens if she gets in. Right. But here we have relative peacetime. The COVID crisis has been well over for a couple of years, and yet the government spending is far higher than it was during the COVID emergency. Not to bore you with numbers, but as you well know, we've gone from federal spending being roughly 20% of GDP to now 24, 25% of GDP. And they want to bake that in. And that's why one of the first things when we get a new president in January, old new president, so to speak, one of the first things Donald Trump has to do is have his budget directors start whacking away at all of these wasteful green crony programs before they get sink real roots. So we don't get a situation like we have with ethanol, where then even though it's no real good for it, it becomes baked in because you can't remove something that the government gives you. So we've got to cut that out right away. That'll save hundreds of hundreds.
That's a lot of money you're saving by cutting out those programs. I mean, I think there's $300 billion
on the deficit. The way you only way we're going to dig our way out of the hole here is by economic growth. We saw that in the 1980s. We saw it back in the 1920s. Every time you allow the economy to grow, the government gets more, we create more resources, and the deficit goes down. Just one other number, just to bore your readers totally on a Saturday afternoon. After World War II, the government debt was, after we led the way to saving civilization, was 121% of GDP. With having a sound dollar, tax cuts in the 1960s, no crazy regulations yet. By the end of the 60s, was down to 35% of GDP. So that's the way you do it. A little bit of a responsibility on the spending side, low tax rates, and by golly, miraculous things happen, like prosperity.
I love that word, peace and prosperity. So a couple just quick final things I wanted to ask you about Steve Forbes, and I appreciate you carving out a little time on a beautiful Saturday afternoon to be with us. So, I'm a Trump guy. Larry Kudlow's a Trump guy. I know you've met with Donald Trump many times, and obviously he'd be much, much better for the economy than Kamala Harris. But there's something that he proposed the other day that I have a problem with. And so I don't always support everything Donald Trump says. I don't think anybody does. And that is, he's talking about price controls on credit card companies. And I hate price controls. I don't think that they work, Steve. And I think that's just going to deny credit to lower income people. I think it's counterproductive. So I wanted your judgment on, does this make sense to put credit card price controls?
What I think the goal is, and this is what he should say, is to have far lower rates on credit cards. Because what would happen if you actually put on something like a 10% cap, people wouldn't be able to borrow again. Those loans would be called in. And that's what happened in the 1970s when inflation kicked up interest rates to high levels. Suddenly people couldn't get, lower income people especially, couldn't get credit because no one was going to lend when prices were going up 15%. You had a cap of 10 or 12. What he should emphasize is that the best way to get lower interest rates, including on credit cards, is by having a sound dollar, a stable dollar, king dollar, dollar as good as gold, as John Kennedy put it. You have a trustworthy dollar, by golly, the cost of money goes down every single time.
So that's a great point. And what my last question for you is something related to what you were just talking about, which is housing. And, if you look at when Trump left office, the mortgage rate was 3%. Now it's in many markets is almost 7%. And that makes housing, buying a home a lot more expensive. It's about $1,200 a month more expensive to buy a house just because of those higher interest rates. And yet Kamala Harris wants all these the government's going to pay your down payment and all of these things. What's the best way to increase home ownership in America?
Well, it's very simple. One is when you have a sound dollar, when you have low tax rates like the flat tax, single rate, simple tax system, where you have exemptions for adults and for children, and that's it. Guess what happens? When your incomes go up, that enables you to have more money to buy a house. And the other thing is, again, with the stable dollar, the mortgage rates become much more reasonable. Banks become much more willing to lend. And as part of Donald Trump's deregulation, one of the things he's got to do is make sure Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac don't come up the housing market again with crazy policies. But then the other thing is, and this is where what they call the bully pulpit, I like to call it the enlightening pulpit of a good president, is that you highlight states that, starting with California, which, no surprise, one of the worst offenders, is all the nutty regulations you have to get licenses and permissions to do a housing project. So you contrast Texas, where you can get a project up and running in a matter of months, with California, where it's a matter of years. Yeah. You wonder why it costs twice as much to get a comparable house in Texas, even though people are moving to Texas, than in California, where people are leaving California.
It's incredible. It's incredible. So, Steve Forbes, last question on the way out is, I do think Donald Trump is going to win this election. I think it's going to be close, but I think Trump will win. And he is going to need really, really smart people around him. And I have suggested you as to be for either Treasury Secretary or Chairman of the Federal Reserve Board. And I wonder which of those two, would you take either of those jobs? Because we need you.
Well, if I was in charge of the Fed, I'd make sure the Fed was a fraction of the size that it is today.
That's why we need you. You mean are you telling me they don't need 400 PhD economists?
My role now is agitator, and so there are plenty of good people out there like you, like Larry, like Art, and also one who would do a superb job, either Treasury or the Fed, because he knows them inside out, so they can't buffalo him in any way, is David Malpass, our friend David Malpass.
Great guy. Yep.
Former head of the World Bank. And also
he's been on our show many times and a smart guy. And Steve Forbes, I want you to be the next Treasury Secretary to straighten out this economy with Donald Trump. Thanks so much for joining, folks. We'll be right back. This is the More Money Show on WABC. Okay. So do we have time before we take a break to slip in one or two quick callers? Oh, good. Fantastic. I broke a little early, so fantastic. Who is our next caller? Steve, thanks for calling. We only got about a minute and a half left, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Oh, we got three Steves in a row here. So when I started listening to you, I was in Philadelphia on the car radio. I came up the turnpike, used the rest area, put the phone in my pocket, and now I'm sitting at my kitchen table in North Jersey, finally getting to talk to you.
Well, it means the world to me that you're spending 3 hours with us. But Steve, what's your question or comment?
A simple question. I'll respect your hard break. You were talking to the woman about the tax on the unrealized gains.
Yes.
My question is, how do they know that you've made that money? And let's say you have something worth $100, it goes up to $150. You get taxed on the $50. What happens if the value goes down to $75?
All right, Steve, I'm going to cut you off because it's a great question. And this is why it's so unfair, because we're going to tax people on their gains. Do you think the government's going to give you money back if you lose? I don't think so. It's heads, the government wins, and tails, you lose. It's a rigged system. Taxing unrealized capital gains is a horrible idea. It's a way to get more and more feathers out of the goose. I think they've taken enough out of us, folks. By the way, we are now up against a hard break, but we are going to hear from Bob and Ryan Payne one more time because they're the two best in the business in terms of your financial advice. And I'm going to sign off now. I hope you have a great, great weekend, folks, and we'll be back same time next week. But right now, I'm going to swing it over to Bob and Ryan Payne.
Talk Radio 77 WABC.
Ryan Payne and Bob Payne back again on the More Money Show from Payne Capital Management. Of course, that's Payne, talking about the markets, the economy, and your retirement. What we used to do back on our radio show days is we used to do the spotlight segment where we would actually take a real case, we dissect it, and we talk about how well or how badly somebody's doing on their path to financial independence. And Court, you've been working on a lot of cases lately. I've been trying to help you once in a while. Why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the cases you're working on, and we can talk a little bit about what they're doing right, doing wrong, just dissect those cases.
Now, of these 3 cases, we have 2 who are about to retire and 1 who is already retired, but they're about to become dependent on their portfolio. So they're both at the stage where they're saying, okay, we have this nest egg. How do we draw off of it? Now, 2 of these cases are very heavily in U.S. stocks, specifically in the S&P 500, and even more specifically in your large cap growth, which is think like your AI companies like your Apples and Googles or Microsofts. These are very aggressive. Think of you're retired, you're about to draw into your portfolio, but you're invested like a 20-year-old, more than 80% in the stock markets. And then on the flip side, the other case we have is only less than 10% in stocks, and the rest of their money is in cash or very short-term certificates of deposit.
Yeah, and that's kind of what we see right now is this like barbell. Either, you're all in owning a lot of S&P 500 stocks, specifically the Magnificent Seven, which we talk about a lot. Or on the other hand, you're just super nervous and you have way too much money in money market funds and cash. And I would argue both are definitely not the right place to allocate your capital.
So, Corey, let's talk about the first case where someone's getting ready to retire. What was the wake-up call when suddenly they realize the paycheck's not going to come in every 2 weeks?
Yeah, and I think that's pretty often is people want to come to us and say, okay, I'm not going to have a paycheck. How can I live off of my portfolio? Which is a good time to look at this. But I would actually argue you want to start to plan for this much earlier. And the earlier you do this, the better. So, yeah, it's a good wake-up call. Come to us before then.
Yeah, well, I give this woman credit. She has lots of individual stocks. She's 80% equity, basically retired now, early 70s. And she's starting to realize maybe I shouldn't be doing this on my own. And we even we went back and back tested and said, hey, your portfolio in a bad market, we went back to 08, 09, you'd be down 50, 60%. How do you feel about that? And obviously she didn't feel very good about that.
Well, guys, it always comes down to that there's no institutional memory, right? We had 2000, we had a crash of 50%. And 7 years later, we had the 2008 correction of 50%. So suddenly, I remember a lot of our prospective clients back then were saying, well, every 7 years the market crashes. Now, market just goes up every quarter. So, all of a sudden people are projecting the future based on their most recent experience. I give these people a lot of credit for being nervous about that.
Yeah, and you should be nervous about it. And I think it's better to be nervous in a bull market than a bear market because we know when prices are high, you're closer to prices going low again,
So I'm sure one of the reasons why that she didn't want to take money out of the market is because of capital gains tax, right?
That's been a huge conversation that we're trying to handle. And that's where you kind of need a long-term game plan. We can take a certain amount of gains, but it might have to be over a couple of years. We can't just overnight say, yep, take off your risk off the table because it might be a big tax bill. So you need to be very cognizant about that.
I mean, Courtney is right. I mean, there's definitely a lot of art when it comes to taking capital gains. I mean, a lot of clients don't know that if you take over a certain amount of gains, the federal government charges an extra 3.8% in that net investment tax.
Here it is. You're 20% capital gains tax, but your portfolio goes down 50 or 60%. You'd be better off taking that 15 to 20% long-term cap gains tax, which is one of the lowest we've ever had in history. So I think that is one of the bigger conversations right now. It's rip the Band-Aid off because no one's going to tell you when, okay, we're at the top of the market, the party's over. Maybe Bob can, but I'm not that good yet.
I do think we are also approaching the end of the year. And that's where we've been talking to a lot of clients. I agree with you. I think ripping the Band-Aid off makes a lot of sense in a lot of cases. But also when we're so close to the end of the year, phasing this out over just 3 months actually is 2 different years that you're spacing this out. So that's where it can make sense to at least have those conversations.
I think it's really interesting because, the research we're getting shows that the average household is weighted more heavily in equities than ever in history. Or, not since the 50s. And it's way up from when it was 2000, 2009, 2008, 2009. So we have this one client comes in with 80% in equities, and then his other prospective clients, it's 80% in cash.
Yeah, well, we know there's $6.4 trillion in cash, and then on top of that, you've got another $2 trillion in CDs or something like that. So, people aren't invested right now, and, this is we beat the drum about this every week, but your 5%, it's not even 5% anymore. Your money market fund is now like, 4.6, 4.7%.
Drops a basis point a day.
Yeah, as the Fed's cutting, that rate's going to keep coming down. But I think there's this kind of feeling of I'm between a rock and a hard place. My yield on my money market fund's going down, but I don't want to buy the stock market at an all-time record high.
Well, that's the beauty of it. There's so much opportunity, other than the Mag 7 or the S&P 500. You see the Russell 2000 still below its all-time record highs. Now we have international stocks.
By the way, you're saying there's more than 7 stocks you can invest? I don't believe that.
I'm betting your inheritance.
I watched Courtney on CNBC. They only talk about maybe 20 stocks.
Betting your entire inheritance, Ryan, on there being more opportunities than 7 companies in the whole wide world, right? It blows my mind. I mean, last week, guys, 7% move in 1 week in emerging markets. 1 week, 28% 1 week in China.
Well, that's the hard part, is that the average person doesn't see the opportunity when it's in front of them. I mean, take China, for example. Everybody thinks China's in a recession, but the reality is that that area of the market's starting to move up.
Yeah, the thing is, it's like you have to recognize opportunity when it's there, which makes it really hard for investors. Come on, they watch the news. They're waiting for the news to get better. They're waiting for confirmation, right? You take the the great financial crisis when the market bottomed in 2009. Right? The news was horrible. I mean, we were trying to get people to invest, and they're like, what, are you out of your mind, Bob? You were right. Things are really bad. And it was like 6 months before the news got better, but you missed a 40% move.
And it's happening on both sides. And I think that's where these 3 cases actually illustrate this well, is people are either really risky and we're trying to get them to take the risk off, or they're so nervous that we're going to have the second shoe to drop, or this recession that's coming, that you're all in cash right now. Right. And I think you need to be somewhere in the middle of those 2 things in all reality. But they're calling this, those most hated bull market, because as the markets go up, you're seeing more and more money go into cash as people are still getting nervous. So we need to, find a middle ground here.
Which was the brilliance of the A to B strategy, right? It's so simple. Once you have your end in mind, once you know what your goals are, your goals, not your neighbor's goals, not some Yahoo on CNBC, your goals, it becomes simple. It's like it's a common sense decision as opposed to an emotional decision.
So explain this to me, Bob. If I want 2 yachts by next year, how should I invest my capital today? That's what I want to know.
Well, that's for the next episode, Ryan. Please, I mean, come on. Not all the secrets in one show.
But it also brings up another good point. I mean, we've had a core position in emerging markets for years, and it's actually, grossly underperformed what the U.S. market or the S&P 500's done. But what everyone forgets is things change, and it changed quickly. And all of a sudden, right, like in 1 week, you get a 19% return in China. And now all of a sudden you're seeing capital get allocated to different places. And I think that's what's really hard for people to comprehend when they're building their portfolio for retirement, is a lot of things are going to work. They're going to work at different times. And you can't have everything into whatever's hot right now, because that's going to change. And it's going to change before the news gets better. If you saved over $1 million for your retirement, myself and Bob and our team at Payne Capital will run for you our total financial master plan. And we'll do that with no obligation or cost. It's a full holistic review. We literally look at everything. There's not a firm out there that will do this work up front. We go as far as building you your own personalized financial portal. We give you a bird's eye view of your entire financial life, and we'll hone in on every financial issue you need to address today, whether it's that income plan for retirement. How do you take Social Security? There's a lot of ways to take it, but one right way for you. How do you draw from your portfolio the most tax efficient way? We'll give you a full income plan, factor in inflation so you don't run out of money. We're going to look at diversification. Markets have been all over the place, up and down. Has your portfolio been extremely volatile? Or have you been sitting in cash? Paralysis by analysis, can't figure out what to do. We'll put together a full diversified investment game plan, show you how to grow your wealth, tie it to your goals, but most importantly, protect it over the rest of your life. And we're going to look at fees and taxes. Wall Street loves to sell you high cost, tax inefficient products, whether it's an annuity, mutual fund, insurance product, brokerage product. We're going to go through every investment you have, deep dive. We're going to show you how to reduce all the internal cost and optimize your portfolio for taxes. It's not what you make, it's what you take. You'll get our full tax playbook. We literally have 4 slots left. If you saved over $1 million for your retirement, all you need to do is call or text at 844-752-6692. That's 844-752-6692. If you call or text us right now at 844-752-6692, that's 844-PLAN-NYC, 844-PLAN-NYC.
If Kamala says the economy is recovered, she's either lying or delusional. Either way, she's leaving us behind. Reject Kamala. Paid for by Duty to America PAC. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. DutyToAmericaPAC.com.